morning, and welcome to our XMOD Talks. This is the fourth in our series for 2019, and today what we're going to talk about is why did my XMOD change? My name is Rod Libbe. I'm Quality Assurance Director at the Workers' Compensation Rating Bureau, and joining me today is Angela Sundin, Operations Analyst. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how you evaluate why an XMOD changed. We'll talk a little bit about an overview of the reasons why your mod might change, changes in the reported exposure and claims and how these impact experience modifications, instances where the mod may have been limited and how that may impact the changes in the experience mod, changes to the formula values that happen on an annual basis, and then changes in the way the XMODs are calculated. We would suggest that you include any questions that you might have in the questions panel. There is a copy of the handout in the handout panel. If you find that you haven't communicated all your questions or after the presentation you have additional questions, you can send an email at communications@wcirb.com. We are recording today's webinar, and that should be available later on today or tomorrow morning. So enough for the housekeeping, so let's get on with an overview of the reasons why an XMOD changed. And I'll turn it over to Angela.
Good morning, everybody. So let's talk really quickly about sort of the purpose of experience rating. There's a couple reasons why we have experience rating and why it's important. The first one is that it is a state-mandated merit rating system. It's used to compare employers against other employers in the same industry. It's also used to change the pricing of insurance to account for unique characteristics of an employer's operations. And lastly, it's used to incentivize employers to maintain a safe workplace and reduce the number of accidents. So let's jump into actually how we calculate the experience modification. What you see in front of you is the experience rating form. It's also called a rate sheet. The rate sheet has a couple different components. If you look on the left side, you'll see that we have a summary of payroll and expected losses that are being used in the mod calculation. On the right side, you'll see a summary of claims and actual losses used in the mod calculation. And if you look at the bottom, you'll actually see what we use to calculate the experience modification. The three major factors that we use are actual primary losses, expected excess losses, and expected losses. If you look at the bottom, you can see that those three factors are being used to calculate this particular experience modification, which is 76%. Also note that the rate sheet includes any approved rating values used to calculate the XMOD for any specific year. Those approved rates could include expected loss rates, D ratios, and primary thresholds, and those values can change from year to year. Those rates are found on our website under the Filings and Plans section. So there are a couple of reasons why an XMOD could change. We do have some triggers that could result in an XMOD change. The first one is when we advance the rating effective date, also known as the RED, by 1 year. That's what we're going to take a look at today and how that affects the calculation of the mod. But there are a couple other reasons why an XMOD could change. That could be that payroll or claims values were changed by the insurer. We had a change in ownership that was reported to us that resulted in a combination or separation of entities in a specific file. Or a closed claim re-rate could trigger an XMOD change. and that would be the aggregate value of all closed claims, would be calculated as less than 60% of the aggregate of the highest value at which each of those closed claims was previously used in a rating. And again, today we're going to look at the first reason, which is advancing the rating effective date by 1 year. So when we look at this, there are a couple factors that we would want to consider. The first one is payroll. Employers could have an increase or decrease in payroll in each classification code from year to year. So we would take a look at that, as well as how the payroll is being distributed into each classification code. Additionally, employers could have more or fewer claims or differences in their incurred loss values for the claims that are being included in the experience period. Another thing we look at is whether the mod was limited. We also look at, like we said, the rating values used, so that would include expected loss rates and D ratios. We have seen that in the past couple years, expected loss rates have been decreasing. So note that if the expected loss rates are decreasing but payroll stays constant, this will result in an increase in the experience modification. The D ratio, which is how we divide expected losses into primary and excess amounts. The difference in the D ratios for each class code are a difference in the severity of the claims by classification code. The D ratio is usually used to calculate the various primary thresholds for each of the class codes. And again, the expected loss rate and D ratio tables are available on our website under filings and plans. So when we advance the rating date by a year, we need to take a look at the experience period. So by advancing the rating effective date by year, we're also pushing the experience period up by 1 year. Just to clarify, the experience period is a 3-year rolling period. It starts 4 years and 9 months prior to the rating effective date, and it finishes 1 year and 9 months prior to that date. So what we do is we look at all policies that incept in that 3-year rolling period, and we take the payroll and loss data from those policies, and we use that to calculate the experience modification. So since this is a 3-year rolling period, as the RAD advances a year, we're using different payroll and loss data to calculate new experience modifications. For example, in a 2019 XMOD, we would typically use a 2015, 2016, and 2017 policy. But as we advance to the 2020 XMOD, the 2015 policy is going to drop out of the experience period, and we're going to start using the 2018 policy for the calculation of the mod. On top of that, we're going to use the next valuation values for each claim that was reported in the 2017 and 2016 years. And just to show a visual, this would be the experience period for a 1/1/19 XMOD, a 1/1/19 rating effective date. So let's assume that we have a current policy, and that current policy incepts on 1/1/19. Our experience period is going to go from, if you look at the bottom, 4/1/14 to 4/1/17. So that means all policies that incept in this 3-year period, we're going to use the payroll and loss data from those policies to calculate the experience modification. So we have a 1/1/17 policy period. That would be the third orange box. And we would use the first USR to include in the XMOD calculation. And we would use the second USR for the 1/1/16 policy. That would be the second orange box if we had a second USR. So we would only receive a second USR if we had open claims. And the same thing for the 1/1/15 policy. We would use the third USR or the latest USR, depending on if there were open claims. As we advance to the next RAD, which is a 1/1/2020 RAD, you can see that everything shifts to the right by 1 year. So now our current policy is a 1/1/20 policy. Our experience period has shifted to 4/1/15 to 4/1/18. You can see that at the bottom. And now we're using the most current USR for each of the policies that are included in the experience period. So the 1118 policy, we're using the first USR, the 1117 policy, we're using the second USR, and the 1116, we're using the third USR. So we're adding the 1118 policy, which is the third orange box, and we're no longer including the 1115 policy, which is the second blue box. So the period just continues to shift to the right by 1 year as we advance the RAD. So we talked about changes in the experience period. Now we're going to talk about how changes in the reported exposure or claims could change the experience modification. So what we want to do is compare the exposure that's being included in the XMOD calculation from 1 year to the next. So the first thing that we want to do is look at the payroll that's being excluded for the policy year that's falling outside the experience period, as well as the payroll that's now being included in the experience period for the new RAD. Did we have any significant changes in payroll distribution from one class to another? Was there a significant increase or decrease in reported payroll from year to year? And the last thing is, do we have a new classification code that we're now reporting exposure in? So like I mentioned at the very beginning, there are 3 factors that are included in the XMOD calculation: actual primary losses, expected losses, and expected excess losses. Specifically for exposure, when we look at changes in exposure, what's driving an XMOD calculation is total expected losses and your total expected excess losses. So any changes in payroll that we look at, we're really going to focus on how the total expected losses and the total expected excess losses have changed. So anytime we look at how the XMOD has changed, we always want to look at the original rate sheet. In this case, we're looking at a 2019 rate sheet, and we're going to need the next rate sheet for the next RAD. So we'll be looking at changes in payroll as compared from 1119 RAD to the 112020 RAD. So again, this is a standard rate sheet. For this particular rate sheet, we see a mod of 125. So let's take a look at the payroll that's going to drop off of the next RAD, the experience period. So that would be the 1115 payroll. So in this one, we can see that we have a class code 2702. Reported payroll for this particular year was $222,257. Our expected loss rate was $9, and our expected losses and our expected excess losses are the last 2 columns, 5,461 and 14,542. So we want to focus on those 2 columns because, again, these 2 drive the XMOD calculation. So let's compare this to the new payroll that's being added into the experience period for the 112020 RAD. So here is the 112020 rate sheet. This one has an experience modification of 147. And we're going to take a look at the 112018 payroll. So for the same class code, 2702, we have reported payroll of 15,910. And our expected loss rate has gone down a little bit, which has affected our expected losses. But we really want to look at expected losses 1,344 and expected excess losses, which is $1,027. So let's compare the 112019 and the 112020 payroll information. So we can see that the 1119, which is the green box, our expected losses was 60,771. Our expected excess losses was 44,180. For the 112020 RAD, our expected losses have gone down to 39,620, and our expected excess losses has also gone down to 30,269. Note that for both of the years, 1119 and 112020, we're using the same payroll information from the 2016 and 2017 policies. So the change from the green to the blue box is really just a result of taking off the 1/1/2015 payroll and adding in the 1/1/18 payroll. And so we've seen an increase of the mod from 125 to 147. So next we'll take a look at how changes in losses are going to affect the experience modification. So again, we're looking at the losses that are falling off of the, falling outside the experience period, and losses that are going to be included into the experience period for the first time. Did we have an increase or decrease in the number of claims or loss values? How did the loss values change from one year to the next? So this would typically apply to open claims, but could apply to closed claims as well. Do we have claims that are being reported on the second or third USRs, the report levels for the first time, maybe because they were late reported claims? And do we have open claims that are closing at higher or lower value than on the previous report level? So again, like I mentioned at the very beginning, there are three factors that drive the mod calculation: actual primary losses, expected losses, and expected excess losses. So changes in losses affect your actual primary losses. So we're going to see how changes in losses affected actual primary losses from 2019 to 2020 mods. So this is the 1/1/19 rate sheet. So we're going to take a look at the 1/1/15 claims. So if you look on the right, we have 4 claims for the 1/1/15 policy. All 4 claims are closed. The actual losses is 7,548, and your actual primary losses is 6,548. So we're going to take a look and see how the actual primary losses changed from the 2019 to 2020. So let's take a look at the 2020 rate sheet. So for the incoming policy, the 1/1/18 policy, we see that now we have 10 claims being reported, 3 of which are open and 7 of which are closed. But take a look at the far right column where we see the actual primary losses. So actual primary losses has increased significantly, or I should say there's a significant difference between the 2018 policy and the 2015 policy's actual primary losses. In this case, the actual primary losses are 49,968. So how does that change in actual primary losses affect the mod? Let's do a comparison. Sorry, let's go back. One thing to note is the 2016 and 2017, we are assuming that the claims values may have stayed the same, but that may not be the case. So the increase of the mod from 172 to 266, part of that could have been from the addition of claim values and the number of claims for the 2018 policy, and our difference in actual primary losses going from, if you look at the 2019 rate sheet, the 1/1/15 policy, the actual primary losses there was 6,548. The 1/1/18 policy is now including 49,968. That would be on the right side of actual primary losses. So if we take a look at the claim values that were on the 2019 and 2020 rate sheet, these are the 2016 and 2017 claim values that were reported on each rate sheet. So like I said before, sometimes these claims go from open to closed. Sometimes the claim values change. So let's take a look first at the claim on the left, the very first one, claim 85385. So if you look on the left side, this was an open claim in 2019. And if you look on the right, it stays open in 2020. The actual losses have changed from 20,395 to 40,353, which is a significant increase. But the actual primary losses has actually gone down from 20,145 to 19,750. So even though the claim value went up, this isn't actually affecting the XMOD calculation in a negative way, since we're not including any additional actual primary loss value into the calculation. And we have another claim, claim 91507, which is on the 2017 policy. It's the the last one. That claim, 91507, has gone from open to closed. And we have the same thing going on there where it closed at, this one actually closed at a lower value, 25,726, versus the open value, which was 27,249. But you can see that the actual primary losses have gone down for 2020. So even though the claim was closed at a lower value than it was previously valued at in 2019, this isn't going to affect the XMOD because the actual primary losses have actually gone down. If you look at the third claim on the left that has the orange arrow, claim 83648, you can see that this claim was open in 2019, but was closed in 2020, again at a lower value. But again, this doesn't affect the XMOD calculation since the actual primary losses for 2020 have decreased from 21,250 to 19,750. Now on the right, we can see one orange arrow. That was for claim 86263. So that claim, if you look on the left side, was previously closed and had an actual primary loss of 2,766. But in 2020, it looks like this claim was revised, even though it had been previously closed. So our actual primary losses went from 2,766 to 13,875. So this would have affected the XMOD since this is increasing our actual primary losses that are being included in the 2020 calculation. So when we actually look at the 2 years and compare them, again, the mod went from 172% to 266%. The major thing that we want to look at here is our actual primary losses for 2019 in the green was 100,757. This increased in 2020 to 151,891. So this is what impacted the XMOD the most since we had a pretty significant increase in actual primary losses. So another thing that might happen is we could have a limited mod for 1 year and not for the next year. So let's talk a little bit about what a limited XMOD is. So effective January 1st, 2015, when an employer has a single claim that's being used in the experience period, the XMOD is going to be limited to no more than 25 percentage points above the loss-free rating. So what that means is that if an employer had only one claim that's being included in the experience period, let's say the loss-free rating was 75% and the mod should have been 120, we're actually going to limit that increase to 25 points, which means the mod would only go from 75 to 100%. Please note that if an employer has more than one claim that's being included in the experience period, that limit is actually going to disappear, and we will calculate the mod accordingly. Also, if we have a USR that has unaudited payroll, we will not calculate the XMOD with the limitation. Effective 2019, claims with a value of $250 or less are not being included in the calculation. So if an employer had two claims in the experience period, one of which was valued at $250 or less, we would still limit the employer's experience modification. So anytime we have a limited experience modification that's being calculated, you will see that on the rate sheet, and it will be designated by an L. We also put the actual unlimited XMOD percentage on the rate sheet so you could see what it would be without the limitation. So let's take a look at this rate sheet. This is a 1119 rate sheet. And we're going to talk about why, even though there were changes in the values that we used to calculate the experience modification, the XMOD may not have changed. So in this particular scenario, let's take a look at this. And in this one, the mod is 103%. It is limited. We have one claim that's being included. This is a claim that was reported on the 1115 policy. And this one has actual primary losses of 7,750. So for 2019, this claim will drop off. But now we have another claim being included for the 1118 policy. And that one has actual primary losses of 3,900. And this is a reduction in the actual primary losses. So you might assume that the XMOD would decrease from 2019 to 2020. But since the original XMOD in 2019 was limited, there isn't actually a decrease in the mod because if you look at the 2020 mod, the loss-free rating was 79%, and we're publishing a 103% experience modification. And this is a difference of 24%. So the second mod, the 2020 mod, is not being limited. So even though the actual primary losses have decreased from 2019 to 2020, because the 2019 mod was limited, there is no decrease in the mod for 2020. So I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons why your mod could change is because there were changes in the formula values. So we do make changes to the rating values on an annual basis. So we take a look at that and see if we do need to make changes. The eligibility threshold is the payroll threshold that an employer needs to go over to qualify for an experience modification. In 2019, that threshold value was $10,000. As of 2020, it will decrease to $9,700. And the reason that this has changed has somewhat to do with expected loss rates and expected losses. We do see, like I said, a trend and a decrease in expected loss rates. So in order to keep the same number of employers in California experience rated, we had to lower the eligibility threshold. To calculate your minimum eligibility threshold, you would want to take your payroll by class and multiply it by the experience loss rate by class, add that all up, and that would give you your threshold value. If that value is over 9,700 for 2020, that means that the employer will qualify for an experience modification. You can find that calculation on our website. Expected loss rates could change, and those are based on class codes as well as the D ratio. Again, those two things can be found on our website under filings and plans. And lastly, the primary threshold could change. Now, your primary threshold is based on the size of the employer's business as measured by total expected losses. We do have a table on our website. We originally instituted primary thresholds in 2017 when we went to a variable split point. It is a substitute for the credibility table, if any of you are aware of the way that we previously calculated XMODs. So those threshold values increase by 500 and then $1,000 and could range from 4,500 to 75,000. Please note that as expected loss rates decrease, this means that your expected losses will decrease. That'll decrease your primary threshold and increase your mod overall. So even if your payroll or claims values have stayed consistent, if these rating values change from year to year, this could impact your mod. So let's take a look at how that actually shows up in the rate sheet. So this is a 2019 rate sheet. We have the 2020 on the right. So what we're looking at here is our 2016 and 2017 policies. Now these policies show up in the 2019 experience period as well as the 2020 experience period. So these actual values aren't going to change. So what we're looking at is the expected loss rate. So for 2019 on the left, our expected loss rate was $9.10 for the 9185 class code. And our D ratio for that class code was 0.415. Now, if you look on the right, the payroll values have stayed the same, but the expected loss rate has gone down to $7.19 for class code 9185, and our D ratio has also decreased to 0.406. So both of these are going to affect your expected losses as well as your expected excess losses. So for 2019, our expected losses was $127,553, and we see a decrease in 2020 to $105,656, and our expected excess losses has also decreased from 2019 to 2020, from $74,615 to $62,750. So even though the payroll for 2016 and 2017, those values didn't change, because of the rating values and those changes, we've seen an increase in the mod from 84% to 89%. And lastly, we have made some changes to the way that X mods are calculated. Over the last couple years, we've changed the formula. Prior to 2017, we had a fixed split point. As of 2017, we changed that fixed split point to a variable split point that varies based on the size of the employer. And that you can see in the expected loss rate D ratio primary threshold table. As well as we made some changes in 2019 to amend the formula to eliminate the first $250 of each claim. This was really to try to encourage employers to report first aid claims. So that's also one of the reasons why, like I mentioned before, with limited experience modifications, we do not include any claims lower than 215 in that limitation. So on our website, we do have a way to estimate experience modifications so that you can figure out how the formula would impact your mod. So this is what it looks like. On the left side, you would put in your payroll and class code information. On the right, you would actually input your claim values. Click on Calculate Mod, and you'll see the calculation results. So the first tab of the Excel sheet will have the inputs. The second will have the results based on excluding the first $250 of each claim. This will also have your expected related in the worksheet for you. You'll be able to see what your experience modification would be. So in this case, it would be 155%. That's in the red. And you would also see your loss-free rating, which would be your rating without any claims. And the third tab shows you your results if we did include the first $250 of each claim, just in case you were curious. So I encourage you to go to our website and use the XMod estimator so that you can calculate any future XMods. So that's the presentation for today. If you have any questions, please submit your questions in the questions panel, and we will answer the questions as best that we can in the time that we have left.
Okay, so one of the questions I see, so one of the kind of the takeaways from this presentation, hopefully, is that there's a lot of things that go on when you change from one year to the next. So when you change payroll, so let's say that the payroll increases, that increase in payroll may also increase the primary threshold for the employer. So that may mean that you are using more of the individual claim values for all of the claims. So even though you have no new claims, those claims, you may be using a little bit more of those values in the calculation of the experience modification. So it can become very detailed to try and figure out exactly why an experience modification changed from one year to the next. And it's probably going to be a combination of several factors. One may be the expected loss rate for one class went up, but the expected loss rate for another class went down. The D ratio changed a little bit for one of the classes, which was driven by the fact that my primary threshold changed a little bit. Claims, again, we've lost claim values from one year. We've added new claim values in. Those claims may not be exactly the same. So what you're really looking for is what's the primary driver of the change in the mod. So the primary driver may have been that the payroll is increasing or decreasing. The primary driver may be that the expected loss rate for our industry is going down, but this particular employer's loss history isn't following suit with the rest of the industry. So what that's going to mean is your mod is going to be a little bit higher. Not that you are necessarily less safe or you have more accidents than what had happened in the past. It's just that the industry trend is a decrease, and we're not seeing that in this particular employer's experience. So again, you're really looking kind of for the big picture kind of things where you end up and you have potentially three losses before, and all of a sudden now I have 10 losses that come in the new year that came in. That's probably really what is driving the experience modification. But you also, again, want to take a look at those loss values. One of the other questions is, so what is going to make the biggest difference in an experience modification? Is it expected losses? Is it actual losses? And the answer is it depends. So there is no answer where you can say, well, in every instance, an increase in payroll is going to be more significant than an increase in losses, or a decrease in payroll is going to be more significant than a decrease in loss. It's going to, again, depend upon all of these, how all of these various rating factors go into that formula. So the bottom line is you're really drilling down to the bottom of that formula, and you're saying, so how did the formula change? What changed the expected losses? What changed the actual primary losses? What changes were to the expected excess losses? And then once you can figure out those changes, then you're going to be able to figure out what the driver was in the experience modification. Again, one of the questions was, well, doesn't, changes from having a claim being a non-compensable claim, isn't that going to impact the experience modification? And the answer to that is yes. That really wasn't kind of the focus of our presentation today, but as we talked about kind of in the beginning part, there's other things that are going to change. But yes, if a claim goes non-compensable between when it was used in the prior year and when it's used in the subsequent year, again, you're going to have less losses, and that is clearly going to impact the mod. But like I said, there's going to be various factors that are going to have to be taken a look at. Okay, I think that for the most part takes care of the questions. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. If we didn't answer all of your questions, we will try to do so. And if you have additional questions, feel free to send those into communications@wcirb.com. Thank you for attending.